It is now time for our second keynote speech of the day. As the commissioner is leaving, I'm going to ask you to kindly still stick around. It is still part of the opening ceremony because we have one more keynote to go. And that one will be delivered by award-winning investigative journalist Carole Cadwalladr. She has worked for The Guardian, The Observer. She's a podcaster as well. If you remember the Cambridge Analytica scandal from 2018, well, she is the one who helped expose it. She's given 2 very powerful TED Talks, and we're happy that she is here with us today on the GMF stage. Please welcome Carole Cadwalladr.
Okay, who the hell are you? That's my question, which I'm sure you're asking. What is this woman doing here? And we've had these illustrious politicians, and now you've got me. And my question to you is, why should you listen to a word that I have to say? And my answer is that I think maybe you shouldn't, because you don't know who I am. And you are skeptical, inquiring journalists, and you know how to question things. And so I thought, when I was giving this, I was thinking last night that actually I'm going to introduce this talk not as a journalist, but I'm going to take a lesson from the digital content creators, the people who other people are listening to. It's where they're getting their news from. And one of the lessons I've learned from these digital content creators is that they say who they are up front. They give their bona fides. So I want very quickly to tell you who I am. And you're not going to agree with everything I say, and nor should you. But so, as mentioned, I'm an investigative journalist. This was a big story that I did, the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal, which had a very long tail. I realized something of a digital content creator because as well as telling my journalism through The Guardian for 20 years, when I was doing this investigation, I also put everything that I was doing out onto Twitter. I put documents, I put articles, I showed my working all through this entire period. And this is my beat, the media and information system, and particularly the sort of fake news ecosystem, as we came to call it. For 10 years, I've been investigating this collision of technology with politics, particularly with elections. And I gave this TED Talk, as mentioned, in 2019. It led to a very long-running legal battle. I was sued by the guy who funded the man on the right, Nigel Farage, because I'd investigated his Brexit campaigns and they had been found to have broken various laws. I crowdfunded that defense, and it was accompanied also by this sort of long-running campaign of misogynistic abuse and harassment. So I very much had skin in the game, and everything I'm telling you comes from that personal perspective. And that personal perspective includes my biases. I want to tell you about these up front. I am really biased in that I am unashamedly pro-democracy. I believe that journalism is there to uphold democracy. And as part of that, I have, for the last 10 years, investigated how technology companies have supported the destruction of the democratic norms by breaking the law, by getting away with it. And so along the way, I also set up a very small non-profit called The Citizens, which has done sort of experimental work around how we hold these tech companies to account. So this is who I am. These are my biases. Everything I say, you should subtract all this from that. And I'm telling you up front because when it comes to the problem of what I think many of us know about why many of you are here, what you've come to discuss, it is this question, as put by the New York Times. As mainstream media faces unprecedented challenges, can it save itself? And you know, of course, the New York Times, there it is. It rises up in Manhattan, this concrete and steel edifice there in the capital of financial power. Almost 2,000 journalists in that building. And I don't need to tell you the stats. This is what's happened to trust in the media. Plummeted. And it's going in one direction. 30% of people now don't trust, it's the other way around. 30% of people do trust mainstream media, but a bigger percentage don't trust it at all. So this is what we're up against. And of course, it's not the only problem. We're at, as you know, an unprecedented moment in terms of what is happening in the world. And I thought, what slide do I use to illustrate that? And I decided to use this one, the Secretary of State for Homeland Security visiting what, to all intents and purposes, looks like a concentration camp in El Salvador, where people are being sent without any due process. And the reason why I think that's so interesting, especially for a global audience, is because it's this, there's Bukele, sorry, I pronounced it wrongly, the president of El Salvador, who Trump is in alliance with. And this is what we see increasingly. This is what's happening. There's an alliance of autocrats across the world. They're copying each other, they're learning from each other, and increasingly they're networking and allying with each other. You know the names, Modi in India, and Netanyahu in Israel, and Orban in Hungary. And this is what's happening. 2004, 51% of the world lived in democracy. Now down to 28%. 49% in autocracies, now 72%. The stakes could not be higher. And for me, this image, the tech bros at the inauguration, is the other piece of the equation that we have to think about. Because this isn't a coincidence that this is happening in all of these different countries across the world. There is an underlying factor, and that is these Silicon Valley tech platforms, the platforms that the entire world now communicates on. And it's not technology per se, it's this particular type, Silicon Valley, VC-funded, social media platforms, which are data harvesting us, which are monopolies, which have accrued this enormous amount of power, and that now, with that axis of autocracy we're talking about, these guys now are also lined up behind them. And that is a new type of power. And, you know, some people in America, they're calling this oligarchy, because it looks so like Russia, sort of this elite businessmen who trade favors with the president and are protected as to make money. But because these aren't just companies, they're not just oil companies, they are these global communication companies. And that's why I believe that it's this sort of new type of power, this broligarchy, that is a type of power that we haven't seen before, with unique challenges to us as journalists. So I want to go back. This is the Washington Post. It's asking the same question here. You'll remember that, of course, Watergate paper. They challenged a president and succeeded. But look who wrote this article. So the hard truth, Americans don't trust the news media. And look who wrote it. It's Jeff Bezos, the owner of the Washington Post. So he used this line to defend the fact that he pulled the endorsement of Kamala Harris before the election. There he is. And that was him killing that article. And this is what Marty Baron, who's the ex-executive editor of the Washington Post, said about that. This cowardice, spinelessness. And we've already seen what's happened now. These other media companies, they are surrendering to Trump's power. I've got a list, actually. I just wanted, let me just check how long I've got. I just wanted briefly to read what Marty Baron says about what Trump is going to do to the press in the US. And although I'm picking out the US here, what we know is that it creates permission in other countries too. So this is just his list, which he gave back in November, and already we can see it coming true. He said we're going to see prosecuting and imprisoning of journalists for leaks of national security information. Trump has spoken at rallies about journalists meeting their bride in prison. That is a reference to being raped. And he said that to cheers from the crowd. He's likely to increase the classification of documents, to scale back information laws, to put pressure on the owners of newspapers. We've already seen that. To encourage allies to bring libel suits, to challenge the key Supreme Court decision, NYT versus Sullivan, to put pressure on advertisers, to expand his power over tech platforms, to deny funding to public radio, to turn the voice of America into a propaganda outlet. We've already seen so much of this. And we also see how this is playing out in the rest of the world. This was Elon Musk campaigning for Alternative für Deutschland before the election here. And this is him promoting, inciting hate and violence, many people would say, in the UK during the riots last summer, and making clear that he intends to interfere in UK's political processes. So I just want very, very briefly to go back a little moment before I carry on. So we're going to catch our DeLorean back to 2016. And that was when we first started hearing this concept, fake news. And Mark Zuckerberg denied it. He came out very strongly and said it was absolutely ridiculous, this idea that fake news could have had any impact upon that election. And really, as I said, this was when I sort of started this investigation and began to... 2016 was when all this work by academics and journalists and congressional investigators and the FBI, and we came to understand these new terms like misinformation and disinformation. But now it's quaint almost to even think of these terms, and I believe that we've got to now retire them, because what we are seeing now is so much more profoundly dangerous, in that what we're seeing is sort of total information collapse, information chaos, that this scroll on the phone that people are seeing, and they don't know what's real, and they don't know who to trust. And at the moment, so much of our output is just in this churn, and we haven't given the people reasons to trust us. And this, I put this in because this was after we did all of this reporting in 2016 to 2018, and we discovered that Facebook, in fact, had played an instrumental role in those elections, and that the company had actually lied to reporters. That's what the SEC said. And Mark Zuckerberg was dragged towards Congress. The key thing to remember here is that absolutely nothing changed. Nobody was held to account. No laws were passed. These companies have got away with everything with absolute impunity. And that's the situation we find ourselves in now. So to go back to 2025 and where we're at, and going to the challenge of reporting on these incredibly difficult times, I said you're not going to agree with everything I say. This is my own personal take. But when we saw this on the same day that they lined up, the tech bros lined up at the inauguration, I think a lot of people knew what they saw here. They saw it twice. But they did not see that reality reflected in much of the mainstream media. This is how the New York Times reported it. It ignited online speculation over the meaning of that hand gesture. And all through those sort of early months, we had people saying with authority, with expertise, saying what they were seeing. People like Professor Ruth Ben-Ghiat saying, she's a historian of coups, she was saying it's a coup. Robert Reich, the former Treasury Secretary, that's what he was saying. Tim Snyder, that's what he was saying. But yet you couldn't find this information told in a meaningful way across in the mainstream media. And this is why we've had this sort of rush to other platforms like Substack, where people are looking for voices to tell them what it means. And this, I think, is something which is a challenge that I put out to you in terms of where so many of you are coming from. And this is where I am too now, out on Substack, which is isn't where I intended to be. But in the middle of this total crisis of what's happening in the world, there was a little crisis in my own news organisation, in The Guardian too, in that they decided to sell off the portion of the newspaper where I've always worked. And we, the journalists, fundamentally disagreed with this course of action. 93% of us voted to go on strike. It was the first strike in 40 years. We profoundly believed that it was going to be a loss to the UK media scene. And I wanted to write about this because The Guardian's creed is that it's not for sale. And that's why I took myself to Substack and became a union spokesperson. And as a result, when the sale went ahead and it transferred, I lost my job. But I'm really happy with my decision. And I'm not telling this story very well, but I'm trying to get to the point, I suppose, that I'm really comfortable with the decision I made, in that I said who I am and I stuck to those values. And meanwhile, The Guardian, like many newspapers, has entered into a syndication deal with OpenAI. So news organizations are having to choose. Do they make syndication deals with these AI companies, which have, other organizations believe, illegally harvested their IP? So some organizations, like the New York Times, are suing and some are settling. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm really not telling this very well. My Ryanair flight was delayed till 4 o'clock in the morning, and it's very personal, I suppose, all of this stuff. And that's, I guess, what I'm trying to get across, is that I'm now just a lone independent journalist, and it's not the place where I intended to be, but I welcome and appreciate the freedom of that, because I think that in this time, we actually do need people who are prepared to speak up and stand up. And that's been my experience from my last years of doing journalism. And I just wanted to tell this little story. I was at Glastonbury, this massive music festival last week, and it was this sort of amazing, wonderful, peaceful 200,000 people. And this was the headline. Oh, hold on. This was the headlines that accompanied that Glastonbury festival. And it felt nothing to do, like nothing I saw at the festival, like nothing that I think the 200,000 people there saw. And what they do see happening on social media is this. This is what we're seeing playing out in real time, and this is the thing which isn't on the front page of the newspapers. And this is why people are fleeing from the mainstream media, because we don't see what we're seeing being reflected on the pages, and we don't feel that there is meaningful exposition of what is actually happening in this moment. So I was told to end it on an uplifting and upbeat note. So this is just my little, it's very idiosyncratic. I told you shouldn't listen to me. But all I can do is be open. I can only be open and transparent who I am. I say be open, don't be open at AI. They are breaking the law. And if we stand for anything as journalists, it should be for truth, justice, and the law. And I think it's profoundly unethical that these syndication deals, these partnerships are being embarked upon. Be accountable. I make mistakes. Look, I've just really fucked up this presentation, and that's who I am. Be collaborative. There's so much competition between news organizations, and honestly, it's pathetic. We have enough enemies out there who are out to destroy us. That was the point I was trying to make. We have to find ways of working together. We need communities of news and not competition. Get over yourselves. This is why, because the far right, the liars, the fake newsers, they are networked. They are strengthened through their networks. We have to have media networks, not empires. I don't think the New York Times is amazing. It does amazing reporting. We need these large, I've always believed that, these large organizations who can stand up to power. But I actually don't think that concrete and glass cathedral on Fifth Avenue is actually an appropriate edifice for this moment. We need to be more permeable. We need to be open. We need to say who we are. We can't believe that people are just going to trust these institutions because they're institutions. If somebody comes and attacks your journalists, if they sue them, if they abuse them, if they harass them, defend them, stand up for them, protect them. Your weakest, your smallest freelancer, your weakest link has to be defended too. And look, this is how bad this presentation is. I couldn't even get the slides right. But this was my final words, which is don't do shitty deals with AI companies. It's short-sighted. We've seen this so many times that it's cash today, but broken ethics and morals forever. And these AI companies are not our friend. They are looking to destroy journalism. This is short-termist. There's research that shows organizations that enter into deals with tech companies actually report on them less critically. Please think about who you are, what you stand for. Human-centered journalism is key. It is not AI.